Their new poll, Time's new poll, finding that most Democrats do not want the president to run again for a second term. 64% say they would prefer a different person run for president. The Times also now quoting officials who, quote, watch out for the president, who, quote, often shuffles when he walks, and, quote, they worry that he will trip. The president's going to turn 80 years old in November. That is a milestone that has never been reached by a U.S. president sitting in office. Reagan, as you know, was 77 when he left the presidency. So the Biden team, says that he plans to run as buzz builds around an early Trump campaign declaration, potentially. So Devin Nunes, CEO of Trump Media and Technology Group and a former GOP congressman, and Richard Goodstein, former Clinton advisor and Democratic strategist. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Richard, you see these reports. Do you share these concerns?
Look, these are not great numbers for Joe Biden. They're worse for Donald Trump because in that exact same poll, head-to-head, Biden beats Trump. And worse, there's really no legitimate Democrat talking about primarying Joe Biden. We saw a poll out of New Hampshire, one of the first states to vote in the primaries, where DeSantis beats Trump. Look, obviously, there's a lot of reasons that if Biden does decide to run for re-election again, he's got a record in terms of job creation, manufacturing creation. Standing in the U.S. in kind of around the world, remember foreign leaders laughing behind Trump's back at a NATO meeting, and at the recent NATO meeting, Biden was applauded. So he's got a record that is perfectly a good, solid one.
Yeah,
and
but the problem is,
in
these numbers, as I said, are coming from the New York Times. The biggest concern is his age, which now seems to be really in the bloodstream. You know, for a while, Richard, nobody was talking about it. I think there was, a sort of impulse to be polite. Now it's getting a lot of exposure from Democrats who are 33% say this is their main concern. He's got a 60% disapproval number. And, you can point out the things that you think he's done right, but obviously he's under a tremendous amount of pressure. And there's all kinds of buzz about Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar or other people, many of whom he beat last time around. And then I'm going to get to Devin. Go ahead.
Look, the fact is there are a lot of Democrats waiting in the wings if Joe Biden decides, as he said in 2020, this was kind of a transitional presidency for him.
He did say that.
So that includes Gavin Newsom, who clobbered his opponent when there was a recall, and Gretchen Whitmer, who's been an upstanding stand-up person in Michigan, in addition to Buttigieg and some others. So I don't think Democrats have anything at all to worry about. They've got a young, vital, thoughtful, articulate group waiting in the wings. If Biden decides not to run, don't forget that Clinton and Obama were in similar standing at this point in their presidencies, and they won pretty handily when they ran for re-election.
Interesting. All right.
Granted, they weren't
here's
80.
the former President Trump in Anchorage on Saturday night. Devin Nunes. Let's watch.
We're a nation whose economy is floundering, whose stores are not stocked, whose deliveries are not coming, and whose educational system is ranked at the bottom of every list. But we are not going to let this continue. 2 years ago, we had the greatest, and I mean like never before, economy and the greatest country.
Devin Nunes, do you believe that the former president is imminently going to announce that he's going to run? There's a lot of talk about that.
I think he's been pretty clear, Martha, that his goal is to, one, get good candidates across the country, and you see him doing that. I mean, it's his first time, I think, ever being in Alaska, up there making sure that we get somebody good on the ballot there. And he's been all over the place. I mean, I've never seen anyone like this that is going around, and at least in modern political history, where you are going around drawing crowds of 10, 20, 40,000 people, not to mention that the people that are watching online at these rallies live on a Saturday night reaches over 1 million people. So it's really incredible what President Trump is doing, and I think he's been pretty clear with the American people. He wants to help the Republicans get good candidates, win the House back, win the Senate back, and then he wants to make sure that his health is good. And I think that's what he's most concerned about. But
Devin,
this point.
My question was that there's a lot of speculation that he's going to try to get in soon. Is that founded?
Look, I mean, he hasn't told me that, but with President Trump, one thing you can always remember, he doesn't do anything the conventional way, right? He's a very unconventional. I think people originally in 2015 didn't believe he was going to run. He was targeted by his own government. I think his whole administration was attacked unfairly by our own government, which those investigations are ongoing. And so, look, he will surprise all of us, including me.
And here's the poll. One more question to you, Devin. This is the poll that Richard mentioned a moment ago. 2024 presidential election, if it were held today, who would you vote for? 44% Biden, 41% Trump. Your reaction to that, Devin?
Look, I think that if President Trump decides to get in this race and run in the Republican primary, I think it would be almost impossible for anyone to mount a serious challenge to him. And then it will be, I don't believe Biden is going to run. I think even most Democrats don't believe he's going to run. And I think they're trying to decide, do they bail ship from Biden before or after the midterms? Because he's essentially, do you make him a lame duck now or later? And I think the other problem that nobody's talking about is that traditionally you would have the vice president who would be out there campaigning for folks, but even she can't draw crowds. So they've got a big problem. Their bench is very, very weak. And I think it will be up to President Trump. If he wants to run, he'll win the Republican primary, and then he'll have to go out and convince the American people that his vision and his record when he was president is one that we want to go back to.
Yeah, you hear that concern a lot, Richard, that Harris is not the obvious successor anymore.
Look, again, it's going to be, if Biden decides not to run, it's going to be a big field. No one's going to clear the field for Vice President Biden. As far as drawing crowds is concerned, when Donald Trump got big crowds in 2020 and 2018, and the anti-MAGA vote was unprecedented both years. He lost by 7 million votes, drawing enormous crowds in 2020. So, look, I think we should kind of keep in perspective. I will tell you, I think Roe was an inflection point. I think that anti-MAGA crowd, which frankly had been sitting on the sidelines a little bit over the past year and a half, was kind of reminded of exactly what it is that upsets them. It's abortion, it's contraceptives, it's same-sex marriage, it's guns. Those are the things that frankly will motivate young voters and others as well, these suburban women that we've talked about, you and I, Martha, over the years, who were unsure whether they could possibly bring themselves to voting Democratic again this fall and in 2024. And right now it looks like they will.
So when you talk about what happens in the midterms, and Devin, our latest Fox News polling basically shows that the GOP at this moment in time, you look at likely leaning Dem, leaning GOP, looks like the majority will go towards Republicans in the midterm elections here. The Senate is a lot of question marks about some of the candidates across there. Are you concerned about places like Pennsylvania and Georgia on the Senate side?
Look, those are going to be the traditional toss-up areas, but I think, one of the points there, Martha, that you brought up, that I think something that I have not seen in my political lifetime is typically in those toss-up, especially to say lean Democrat seats or lean Republican seats, you want your Republican or your Democratic president, vice president, presidential candidates in those districts. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing these districts that are lean Democrat, don't want Biden, and they don't want Harris. And I think that's a big problem for them, because you're talking about seats that Biden probably won by 5 or 10 or even 15 points, and they don't want Biden or Harris around. I think that's going to spell trouble for them. And I think you're going to find it hard-pressed that there's not a candidate there are very few Republican candidates in the House or Senate. They're going to be begging and are begging for President Trump to come into their district, because he helps them raise money, he helps get voters to the polls, all things that are going to be incredibly important in this off-election year.
Well, Devin Nunes says he does not think that the current president will run again. And Richard, you seem to sound like you think that he will. So we'll see where it goes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Taking that as word.
All right. Good to see you both. Richard and Devin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
So this is going to be epic. I mean, you remember the big battles in the 80s and 90s, right? You're about to see something unfold here, and a new twist this afternoon from Elon Musk. Neil Cavuto on the breaking news next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.